I'm Joyce Spicer. I'm come back home to Dallas. This is my home. I was a private eye for 37 years. It was my job to put guys on death row around the country. And when I got ready to start retiring in California, the district attorney said, "You write the funniest reports about murder. Would you like to write some books? You ought to write some books about your cases." And I said, "No, I'm not interested." So the first thing I did was go to some conferences and found out I did have a knack for writing some of the funny things that appear in my books. And I wrote and sold a 3-book deal. It was called the Harbor Point Mystery Series. And so when I retired, I started writing, and I got my first book done, then my second book, and then this book came out last year. In the meantime, I was going to college and getting my master's in business, and I got a PhD in marketing. And all along the way, I realized that once you get the book written, and you get the book edited, and you get it agent, and you get it sold, now you got to find somebody to buy the book. So I took my PhD in marketing in California, and I was at a mystery conference in Philadelphia, and I was sitting with some wonderful luminaries like Michael Connelly and Jeffrey Deaver at a little Midnight by Chocolate reception that was held at the hotel. And Jeffrey said, "You should write a book to help people market their books and understand what their responsibility is to the written word." And I said, "Really, Mike, you and Michael, you are the kings. You've sold the Harry Bosch series, and Jeffrey Deaver sold his Reimer series, to Denzel Washington. What could I teach people about writing?" But on the way back from Philadelphia, I outlined the book, and it became Power Marketing Your Novel, and it won 2 awards. So I guess I know something about marketing. And then someone said, "In between your mystery series, would you be interested in writing a true crime? Because my brother's on death row," the man said. And I said, "No, I'm not interested." Well, 4 years later, this book came out. And he's still on death row in Florida, and so this is my true crime, The Cross-Country Killer. In the meantime, I just sold and finished editing Howard Keel's life story. It's called Only Make Believe. It is book number 8. And number 9 is done, and it's in New Zealand. And I'm writing number 10. I also wrote and produced a musical last year in California. And I also wrote the lyrics to the musical. And I moved to a little retirement community here near Allen, and I'm still writing. I keep thinking I'm going to retire, but nobody will let me retire. I just got 2 contracts in this week, one for a play and another for a screenplay of an undercover DEA agent who was instrumental in a huge takedown operation during Clinton's administration. And we're going to blow the socks off of Clinton's administration again, because I just love doing that. So I'll transfer that to you now.
Okay. My name is Eric Holmes. I'm a local Allen resident. I've lived here for about 3 or 4 years. Actually grew up in Dallas. And then I went away after high school. I went to West Point and entered the Army. And so I was away from Texas for about 20 years, and I came back in 2001. And my writing career started late also. I had all these aspirations of wanting to write when I was younger. And I would do some sketches and things, but then I kept thinking, well, I'll put that off until I retire. Well, last summer, I was sitting down talking to a friend of mine, and we were talking about the newspaper and what was going on with Iraq and the current events and everything that was going on. And I said, well, I ought to write a book about this. Have you ever had one of those feelings? You just think, like, I can do that. And I didn't really realize I was serious. I just said it. And my friend jumped out of his chair and says, "Do it!" And then it hit me like, no, I'm obligated, I have to. So I went and I took all my contacts, all my emails, everybody I knew. I was in the Army, I'm in the Army Reserves, I have lots of friends that are in Iraq. And so I sent out emails and I said, tell me your stories. In a matter of just a few short weeks, I was flooded with emails, letters, diaries, photocopied diaries, CDs full of photographs, all kinds of material. And I looked at all this, and then I realized, well, I've got to craft this into a book. I'm going to use the stories that people have told, and then my own research. And I did all my research in the Allen Library, which I thought was great. And so then, in just a matter of 3 months or less, I put together this book, but then I had to hand it over for editing. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the people that are over in Iraq. I learned a lot from the soldiers, the Marines, the sailors, the government employees, people in the United States that have sons and daughters over there, Iraqi Americans that live in the United States that have family over there, and volunteer workers. And one of the amazing things I learned is there's more to the story than you see on the news. And it's very interesting. Everyday people have everyday stories. When you put it all together, it's very heartwarming and very understanding. When you talk to people that are lying in a tent while grenades are going off and someone is killing somebody and they're wondering what to do, or you're talking to someone about, leaving his family behind and not knowing if he's ever going to see him again for, who knows how long. It just makes for really interesting stories. And when you put it all together in a framework, that's what I did. I put it all together in a framework, and I organized it, and I edited it. But it's really a collection of a lot of what other people have done. And there's a total of 54 people that have contributed in this book. And actually, I did have my own little story in there, but it's anonymous. It's a secret story. Yeah, and you have to guess which one it is.
Finally have a story.
And so now I'm learning all the things that I wanted to look up in Joyce's book on how to market your novel, and that's what I'm doing. To promote this, the last couple months, I've been on about 35 radio talk shows, talking to people. Some of them have been taped, and I'm really enjoying listening and talking to people and getting people's reaction on this event that is certainly very newsworthy and everybody's talking about it.
Well, my name is Janet Jones, and I am a romance writer. And I think I could probably start by saying I have been writing all of my life, and I think the thing that made me want to write is Dick and Jane. If you remember the Dick and Jane readers, anybody? Hold up your hand if you remember Dick and Jane. Thank
Yes,
you.
I remember.
Yes, you. Okay, so you know who. Okay, you know who they are. Well, if you recall, Dick would always do things wonderfully well, and Jane would always have to watch Dick do them wonderfully well. So I think my first desire to write was that I wanted to change the story. I wanted to see Jane ride the pony fast, And I wanted her to ride that pony into the ground and leave Dick back there in the dust somewhere. Eat my dust, Dick. And so I think when I really started reading a lot, I began to try to change the stories, at first just in my imagination. Also, my family was a great storytelling family. When you put storytelling with wanting to change stories so that they turn out the way you want them to turn out, you begin to realize those stories can come from inside you without, very much of anything but your imagination. And when I got serious about it, I guess I was probably about 18, and I really started getting seriously trying to become published and learned a lot. And I have to say, these are the most wonderful treasures in my life, this group of young writers here. And that one's mine.
Yay!
But anyway, so my first novel has just come out this month. It's an ebook, and that's a new technology. I probably will not do that again, but I have to say that if you've never read an ebook, give it a try. It's wonderful. It's great. The interesting thing about ebooks is that 80% of ebooks are sold for people to read them on their telephones. Now imagine that. If you have a smartphone, I think they're called, your cell phone, 80% of those are being downloaded to their telephones so they can take them in. Also, they have like rocket readers and just these little portable readers. You can also get ebooks just to read on your computer. This is the first 3 chapters of my book. I have this in PDF format. So if you have Acrobat Reader on your computer, or you want to download that, you can read any ebook at all. You can read with the Acrobat Adobe Reader. And probably my next book will most definitely be coming out in print. Ebooks are a little bit trying right now. They're very difficult right now to get into and to really do well with. So my agent is located in California, and she's working on a book deal, also possibly a movie deal, so we don't know. That will be my next book, and it's also a vampire romance. But I've lived in Texas all my life, and I love Texas. I love the people of Texas. They're the best people in the world, and I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. And my family and I have lived here in Allen for, goodness, about 8 years. That's my dad. He came to help me.
I survived a kidnapping, my car being blown up, the mob having a hit out on me, and the DA encouraging me to write. So my first 3 stories are fictionalized based on real cases that I had. So Camilla Walker in my books is me. That's what inspired me to write.
Well, I'll take Dick and Jane over that any day. So I think pretty much I probably answered that question a moment ago, so I'll pass it on to you. Go for it.
Okay, I think I tried to answer that question earlier. I'll just repeat. I had a latent desire to write, and it was really an event in the news, something current that maybe just want to stand up and write about it. Had one of those moments where I used to say, I'm going to write a letter to the editor. And I think that was the driver that made me stand up and actually do it.
Taking the time in a day to do it. One of the things, I often speak at the LA Times Book Festival, and I told 130,000 people my first year there that one of the reasons I got so many books done is that I took games off the computer, and research is not writing. You really do have to define a time in your life every day where you're not answering phone, I call it quiet time, where you sit down, put your little butt in the chair, and just throw up on paper without any outside involvement. And putting games on your computer is not getting it. And on the internet, chatting is not getting it.
Okay, obstacles to writing. Oh, those games, definitely, yeah. I don't know. Early on, I think probably as a young person, I think early on facing a lack of confidence in myself. Also, just really realizing that it's very difficult work. You have to apply yourself. And at first, what you really want to do, you want to lose yourself in your story, and especially, when it's the world you want to live in all the time. And you can do that. In fact, I think you should do that on your first draft. When the story's new, it's coming out of your soul, it's spontaneous, you get it down, you enjoy yourself, you write it for yourself with the knowledge that at some point you're going to have to apply some technique to it and take a look at your goal, your motivation, and your conflict. And that, of course, you have to save for your revision time. So I guess my biggest obstacle to getting it done was learning that there's a time when you have to lock your muse in the closet and let your inner editor sit down and do your job and do her job, and you have to listen to what she says. And that was probably the biggest, hardest thing I had to learn.
Well, there's another part that's an obstacle you have to overcome, and that is, how do you feed your family while you write? You mentioned staying up late at night and working and trying to juggle 2 things at the same time. For me, that was the hardest thing, was deciding that I was going to do it, this was going to be my job, and I was going to work it nonstop until it was done. And the obstacle was making sure I had enough money in the savings account to last until the book sold.
I have the entire edition of Nancy Drew.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Marilyn Benson was one of my favorite authors. I knew she wrote Nancy Drew novels. And I had the pleasure of meeting her before she died a few years ago. She was just one of the writers. They were, 8 writers, I think, who wrote Nancy Drew. But I got to meet Marilyn before she died. I read all the classics, though, as well. I read F. Scott Fitzgerald and Sinclair Lewis and Tennessee Williams. Raise your hand if you recognize any of those authors.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Oh, there is still required
Yes.
reading in high school on that.
Yes.
I read Silas Marner. I read, the Canterbury Tales. I've always enjoyed literature. I've always enjoyed literature. I've always enjoyed Shakespeare. You know, I've always read. I've read since I was a child.
What I read? Well, I'll tell you, I started reading animal stories when I first started reading, and that was really all I would read. I would read horror stories. I read Walter Farley stories. I read, oh golly, I read Black Beauty 36 times. I'm not kidding. I promise I'm telling you the truth. I'm not exaggerating. I read anything about animals, loved animal stories. I can't read animal stories anymore. I will cry. I start to look at the first page of an animal story and I start to boo-hoo. I can't read them. But I read my first romance when I was 15. And I was sitting, I'll never forget it, I was sitting in my English class in 7th grade, and my best friend stuck this page under my elbow, this book under my elbow, and I was trying to get ready for the class, and I said, "What is this? Is it got a dog in it?" And she says, "No, it's not a dog story, okay? It's a romance, and I want you to read it." So I stuck it in my purse and took it home, and I stayed up all night reading it. I'll never forget, it's called Blue Jasmine. Oh, and it was a story of a sheik who ran off with a lady in a desert. Now, okay, that's about as silly as it gets, but it was very thrilling. And from then on, I read romance very, very much, goodness, Barbara Cartland is probably my first thing. No, I know you wouldn't know Barbara Cartland. No. But
I met Barbara.
Did you really?
Yes.
I read Barbara Cartland. I read everything Barbara Cartland wrote, and it was just like, it's great stuff for a 15-year-old in the 70s. And I guess probably of other books that I read, Charles Dickens was probably my favorite author outside of the dog and horse stories, So.
What'd you read, Eric?
I read, growing up, once I got over the 3rd and 4th grade type books, I started reading classics. Mark Twain and Jules Verne were in elementary school, and from there it went to Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald, and who's the other guy that?
Ring Lardner?
I just anything I could get my hands on, and I really concentrated, and I've always done so, concentrating in more of classics, because I know there's just like a limited amount of time, and if a book can withstand so much for so long, then you've got to think it's a good book.
However, I must admit that probably Sinclair Lewis and Hemingway, those classics probably would not sell in today's market, because today's market is not literature, it's marketing.
That's true.
That's the sad part.
That's true.
But I still read those books.
I do too.
I've read about everything Hemingway wrote, about everything that Dickens wrote.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Some of the lesser novels, if you find a really good author, and everyone reads the ones that's required, but when you go back and you read the other ones, sometimes those are so much more enjoyable because not everybody reads them.
I recommend, if you're interested in finding out how the publishing industry used to work in the 20s during those days of those classic authors, read Scott Berg's Max Perkins. He was the first really genuine editor, and he was with Charles Scribner for many, many years. And he made Ernest Hemingway rewrite The Sun Also Rises 59 complete times. 85,000 words, 59 complete times. And that's what editing used to be. It's not like that anymore. But it's a genuine, and it's in paperback. You can pick it up. Scott Berg's a very excellent biographer.
One of my more recent authors that I really like reading is Larry McMurtry.
Lonesome Dove.
Well, he's famous for The Lonesome Dove, but he's written so many other things that The Lonesome Dove was the movie, but he's got all kinds of more recent situated books.
Evening Star.
The Evening Star, Terms of Endearment, Cadillac Jack. He wrote the Last Picture Show.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Good soft reading, but he's a wonderful Texan. He's a wonderful yarn writer. He writes wonderful yarns. I like it. It flows well. I think you would enjoy it. I wrote poetry all during as a child, and I wrote lyrics to songs. I wrote short stories. I wrote theses. I probably helped 400 boys graduate from high school because I wrote all their theses for them. Their graduating papers, all their essays and stuff. So I've been writing all my life, but start writing on a book, I started writing in about 94, 95, and I took classes from Rod Thorpe, who wrote Die Hard, from Ray Bradbury, who is one of my mentors, Fannie Flagg, Fried Green Tomatoes, one of my mentors, Sue Grafton. So I got my first book published in 98. So I probably 94, 95 when I sat down seriously and put my butt in the chair and said, okay, you got to get this book. You've been telling everybody you're writing a book, now you got to write one. That's what happens when you tell people you're writing a book. The first time they see you, they go, how's the book coming? Yeah.
It's a good way to make sure that you do it.
Exactly.
Is to announce you're going to, and then everybody's going to hold you accountable.
Yeah. And then the fear that no one will love your baby. They won't even like your baby. That's the fear, is turning loose of that baby the first time.
That's a huge inhibitor to wanting to write. You want to write, you want something to say, and you're so afraid someone's going to be critical of it, or you're so afraid it's not going to be successful, or it's not going to come out right, that you just keep putting it off and you keep putting it off. But
Of course we do.
when you make that decision, you stand up in front of a party and say, I'm writing a novel.
Exactly.
It really helps.
Well, I always had such support from my family that once I got over the hurdle of believing that I could do it, I didn't ever feel that I couldn't. But fear of criticism, yeah, especially in my genre. Boy, I'm writing a romance novel. Oh yeah. And yeah, I can believe.
And the interesting thing about it is sometimes you'll think to yourself, well, no one's going to publish my work. It's not good enough. Or, you know, who's interested? There's enough books out there. And the amazing thing about it is that you can write, and it's better than you think it is. Because there's a lot of people that don't write so well, and they're the ones that you hear all the horror stories about, that they submit their manuscripts to 70,000 publishers and they all get rejected. Well, that doesn't mean that's going to happen to you, because you might be much better.
I probably first wrote a poem. My mother, I was not raised by my mother and father, so we corresponded a lot. And I remember writing a poem to my mother for her birthday. And I remember I was about 7 or 8, probably around 7 when I wrote a poem. And it was kind of a home improvised birthday card.
First thing I ever wrote, I was 8. It was a short story. That was my first real big piece of fiction. It was about a worm who went on a journey. He had to get from one person's backyard to someone else's backyard, and he had a little stream he had to go through, and he had, it was just a great saga of how this little worm made it across the stream on a leaf. And the most amazing thing happened when I got to the end of the story. I was thinking, wonder if he's going to make it to his promised land, But just when he gets over to the other backyard, he's safe and he's happy. For some strange reason, I had it in for that poor worm. A big bird comes along and lands and bang, snaps him right off. So, and goes away, and he was dead. I don't know why I did that. I mean, I went through this. I think I was just so, excited about this poor worm. But then I guess I thought I had to make it a sad ending to make it important, which I have to say I'm glad I don't write that way anymore, because in my genre, romance is the one genre that absolutely must promise you a happy ending. That is, in fact, one of the criteria that makes it a romance. It has to have a happy ending. And so, being an optimistic person, that's where I wound up. So I've come a long way from the poor little worm getting eaten by the bird.
Your stories remind me. I also wrote when I was younger. And it's funny, when I used to write, I didn't know how the story was going to come out. And it would take me where it wanted to go, and I'd just keep writing, and I didn't know how it was going to end until I was done. And it was fun. It was more entertaining for myself. in a more serious note, I started writing years and years later when in my job I was required to write almost technical type things. And they are so hard and so laborious, and they had to be perfect in the outline and structure and weighting, and it was about 2 or 3 years of that. It was interesting because I really learned a lot on a lot of details on making sure that I'm getting my thoughts across and people can understand them. But I don't wish that on anybody.
It's very interesting. I got, when I first sent my book out, it was to the Maui Writers Conference. And I went to Maui, and I got in line to register, and I had already pre-submitted my manuscript, hoping that some of the editors who were there would take it. And there were 39 rejections in the envelope. And I was standing in line, going through my envelope. No, I don't want to represent you. No, I don't want to. And I'm counting these rejections, and I'm going, I'm done here. And my ex-husband, who was my husband then, is standing beside me, and he goes, come on, we came all the way to Maui, you're not going to give up. And I went, yes, I am. No, you're not. And I actually got 72 rejections in total on my first book before I found somebody who loved Camilla Walker as much as I did. And I haven't had a rejection since then.
Oh my goodness.
And in fact, I've got an agent calling me for my next book, and I'm only 4 chapters into it. So, but I wrote a book about that. I teach at the college and the university level, and I speak at a lot of writers' conferences. And I have a lot of handout material for you all tonight, too, which I'll talk about if you all ask me the questions. And I wrote a little book called Rejections of the Written Famous, because I kept hearing from all my wonderful friends about why they didn't give up. What if I had given up on rejection 72 and didn't wait for 73? Because with 73, I got a 6-book deal. 2 3-book
man.
deals, and my 3 books are just now here. So I still owe him 3 more books. So you can't give up. I won't let you give up.
That's good. That's great.
What's your story?
Rejection.
Rejection.
I could paper my walls with them, but I think that probably is one thing that when you first, as we were saying, send our babies out there, and you find a lack of enthusiasm or appreciation, you just have to keep going. It's perseverance. That's what it takes. And I've been trying to get published for about 6 years. I mean, really seriously trying. But I know some wonderful writers who are yet to be published, who are some of my favorite, most wonderful writers. They're my critique partners. They've been trying for as long as most of you babies have been alive, and then some. And they don't give up. And that has helped me to realize that just in honor of them, I won't give up. And I've got 1 book out, and hopefully when I'm their age, I'll be writing still. And they've really been a lot of inspiration for me. Because if I were to give up, what does it say to them when they've been trying for 20 years, some of them, and they write wonderfully? It's just a matter of finding someone who's, as you say, enthusiastic, who really is excited about your work and your characters and your stories. And there is someone there, and you just can't give up on it.
I have almost a different perspective. And I guess that's why there's 3 of us up here. We can all give you different answers.
Yeah.
A couple years ago, I started talking, I went to a conference, I started talking to some people about writing, and I learned something about treating your book as a business. And realizing that if you're going to write a book, it has to be a business that you have to know before you approach an agent or a publisher that because the publisher is going to think of it as a business. Because the publisher is going to invest money in your book, he's got to pay the printing costs and all the production costs. So he wants it to make money. So I realized this before I started the book, I had this in the back of my mind to present to the publisher a marketing plan, a business plan, an idea of who's going to buy the book, why they're going to buy it, just a whole marketing scheme. And so I had a publisher lined up to publish it before I written 1 word. I just sat down and said, this is what I'm going to do. Here's the plan. Here's the audience.
Yeah.
And he says, great.
Proposal. Yeah, that's fantastic.
I probably have 50 books at home that I haven't read. And it's all kinds of things. It's how-to books, it's biographies, it's histories. I've got David McCullough, John Adams. I mean, I've got tons of books at home. I probably have 50 because I don't read when I'm writing. Our brain is two separate parts, a right brain and a left brain. And I stay in my right brain far more than most average people do. And that's why I have trouble sleeping at night, because my brain is cooking and I can't say, okay, let's go to sleep now, get in the left brain. And if I could get in my left brain, I could enjoy reading, but I don't. Until I get this, I just finished Howard's book. I'm 4 chapters into the next one. When I get the next one done, I will take a break and I will read. But I don't read science fiction. You know, I don't care for it. I edit it. I help people edit, but I don't read science fiction, and I don't read fantasy. I don't read children's books hardly anymore, unless I teach it. If I teach it, I teach it 4-year colleges. I teach children's writing, and so if I do read children's writing or young adult teen work, it's because I'm editing or I'm teaching. I don't do it for pleasure anymore. I do it because I'm trying to help at the student level.
Well, I like to read history. That's what I got my bachelor's work in. So I have a love for history, mostly medieval history. But as far as fiction, it's an interesting thing. I can't read anything while I'm writing either, because the first thing that happens is I start thinking of other books, and then I'm fickle to the one I'm working on, you know. But when I'm reading for fun, I like to read young adult fiction of just about any kind, but especially fantasy. And romance, of course. But I do read outside my genre because I learn so much if I do that. But I would have to say Sherwood Smith is probably my favorite author at this particular moment in my life. Not real well known yet, but she's going out there. So probably young adult fiction and romance and history.
What do you read, Eric?
I love to read. I really do. But I really gravitate and enjoy reading a modern fiction where there's a lot of character development, there's a lot of insight, a lot of description. A lot of my peers, you know, being that, you know, I'm an Army officer and all this, you know, they're big on Clancy and some of these action-packed books, and I just don't enjoy those at all because there's no inside the mind of the character, there's no development of learning from that, and that's what I really enjoy.
In our industry, there are 2 kinds of books: plot-driven books and character-driven books, and it's one of the reasons that sometimes if we buy a book, that we put a bookmark in and close it down and never pick it up again, because it's not driven to what we want. And that's your point exactly. You know, Grisham's work is clearly plot driven. You don't have any idea what the character looks like. Tony Hillerman's the same way. Can anybody identify the Indian? Nobody even knows what he looks like. So, you know, they're either plot driven or character driven. Very seldom do you have those that are together.
I got to say, Grisham's gotten a lot better.
Okay.
So when he first started, I didn't like his books at all, but
Okay.
I appreciate I've read almost all his books, that he has gotten better writing
Okay.
as he goes through the years.
Okay.
It's just my opinion.
Absolutely. Right now, I don't have a schedule. I just recently moved to my new location, so my daughter is here and helping me get unpacked and my office set up. But when I'm on a schedule, I work until my right brain is empty, and sometimes that's 12 hours, sometimes it's 2. I start in the morning just like everybody else. I start around 5 or 6, and I sit down in the seat and I start writing. And then I quit writing when I'm empty. Now, in between you have a life, but I will go days and not even realize I haven't eaten. Yeah. But then I have to get all that done because I've got the marketing plan to do, and then I go on book tour because I'm working on the marketing plan on Howard's book right now. I go on tour in April. And I take my laptop with me, and when I'm not speaking, I'm working in the hotel room on a laptop.
I think it's something that all writers have in common, I guess. If you're writing, you're not conscious of time at all. So, I mean, I'm time challenged. Ask Carrie. Ask my dad. I'm time challenged. I mean, I have no time management skills really to speak of, but I find that writing at night after everyone's in bed, my kitty is not needing me, my child is asleep, everybody's all quiet and everything's peaceful, and I don't know, it feels like a really good time for me, and I'm sort of waking up about that time, and early morning is good too, but I don't really try to stick to a schedule because if I did, life would intervene. But I will say this, if I do get started, I usually have to be dug out of my room because, and my family, bless their hearts, they worry, get up, walk around, you're alive, okay? Live people walk, they get up, they walk, they go do things, at least, go to the bathroom, do so. It's, I mean, a potty break and hygiene, this is, those are the only thing that, but eating, it's what is food, but not that you can tell, but it's, but anyway, I think at nighttime is a really good time for me to write because it's quiet, it's peaceful.
I would agree with, once everybody's to bed and it's quiet, it's a great time to write.
Mm-hmm.
When I put this together, it was a sprint for me. I didn't sleep much, I didn't eat much, I lost 10 or 15 pounds, I didn't work out, and I didn't go to the gym like I regularly do. I didn't do a lot of things like I regularly do. I was just so into it that I just didn't want to put it down. And you'd stay up till 4 or 5 in the morning, and my wife would wonder why I was so sleepy in the morning. I'm like,
I have an office, and that's all I do in my office. Again, there's no games in there, there's no books in there, there's no radio in there, there's no television in there. It's just my computer and me and a desk and my research material. And I cut the phone off. I have quiet time. My daughter made me do that. And because I use, a writer actually will use any excuse not to write.
Yeah.
Did I hear the phone ring in the other room? Sit down. She goes, sit down. In fact, the other day when I was talking on the phone and I said, oh, I'd love to. She went and got a green sticky and she wrote no on it and she stuck it to her forehead and she came and got right on my face. Because she knows I'll volunteer for anything rather than write. And she put this little sticky on my forehead. Is that not the truth?
and the other thing is email. Email is such a distraction.
Oh, it is.
You think that you're just looking at the email box waiting for something to someone to write you an email so you can do anything you can not to write.
That would have to be a teacher. She passed away last year, and she was a very popular writer in Texas. Her name was Ann Fierce Crawford, and she wrote Women in Politics and a book on John Conley. She was a teacher at UT, and she taught me English and history and speech and drama at Beaumont High School, and when I graduated in 1959. And she was my teacher, and she was really my mentor. And as a matter of fact, when she passed away, we were working on a book called Death of a Good Old Boy. We were working on a joint venture together. And it was she who encouraged me to do the marketing book as well. So,
I think my family probably, I would have to say, because I grew up with books in my home. And of course, teachers were there all the time, but I think having someone who read to me and bought books for me and told stories to me helped me always to develop a sense of story and helped my imagination to grow. And I think probably I would have to say that, my family.
I remember very distinctly my 7th grade English teacher. She was really sharp. And she believed that I would be a writer, and I kept putting it off and not doing it. But it was always very comforting to know that she was gonna, she believed one day I would be a writer, and that was always good to know someone thought that well of you. This book was more, when I started it, I thought it had meaning for me because of the reasons for it. But it also had another meaning, which was it was going to represent me actually doing it, completing it, getting it published, getting it out there, and encouraging myself that, hey, you know, I got a little gold star, you know, and so then I give myself permission to do the writing that, I mean, I have 40 outlines of books that I'm not finished, but I really want to jump into those.
That's exciting.
I know that nonfiction is a big seller now, so I will continue writing nonfiction. I still have the 3-book mystery deal to do, and I'm working on my 4th book in my spare time when I feel like fiction. I kick that book open, but I'm writing another nonfiction book.
What's the topic?
Bartender Pat. Yeah, she holds the Guinness World Book Records for slamming drinks across America and in Mexico. And she has extraordinary stories, people stories, life stories about her tending bar in every state. It's a very unique story, and she's a very unique lady. So that's my next book.
That's your next book.
That's cool. Well, I will probably write some biographies about great historical figures that I've come to love and admire and read a lot about. I also write historical romance and young adult romance, but probably if I do some nonfiction, it'll probably be historical biographies. So that'll probably be what I'll do.
Yeah, I'm working on a storyline. I'm really excited about it, and I pitched it to someone in Hollywood, and he was going, no, this will be a TV movie, and
Cool.
and you know, I'm thinking like a business, right? You know how, but I'm really excited about it, and I'm not going to tell you what it is.
Well, tell us when you finish it so we can have you back.
Yeah.
I have a TV show that's been in production for about 2 years. It's called I Spicer, and it's a cold case. It's cold case cases where I investigate them, and I have two episodes in the can, and they're trying to sell it through AFTA, but we'll see. You know, I've got a Hollywood agent, but
Good for you.
That's
you know,
great.
they don't move on those very well. And I've got an FBI agent on my program who's a very close personal friend. We do a lot of profiling together. So.
You know, one time I had a chance to sit down at a cocktail hour and talk to the president of a major movie studio. It was it was 10 years ago, and it was a great opportunity just to sit there and talk to him. And he actually made the statement. He goes, I'm looking for screenplay. You know, I'm looking for scripts. He goes, I don't get enough of them. I don't get enough good ones. I don't get enough to review. And to think that, you know, all these people out there writing, and here's the guy that is saying, I don't get enough of them.
I know.
What's his name? Tell me. I'll tell my agent. Hey, look, there's a guy.
Well, my screenwriting partner is the retired vice president of Columbia Studios. So hopefully I have an in for this next screenplay that I'm working on.
That's good.
So you got to use those. You got to capture those points
That's
when they're there,
right.
Eric.
Yeah, you know, I said, oh, I'm a writer. I've got all these writings. We goes, well, send them to me. And I didn't have anything ready to send.
Oh.
And he's just like, well, when you write something, you know, first write it and then talk to me. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah, really.
Write it and register it. WGA, right? WGA West, $20. It's good for, what, 6 years? You got to register it. Or you use it or lose it. With my mystery series, these are cases that I lived, so I know how they turn out. Camilla Walker lives and the bad guys go to jail, or they die. But I outline a book like police officers do a storyboard a case. I storyboard it with circles. I don't know if you all know the circular plotting method or not. Be glad to come to your school and talk to you about it and show you all how the profile. I also sit down before I write one word of the book, and I do a complete biography on every major character in the book, so I know exactly what they look like, what they dress in, where they wear, where they sleep at night, what their house looks like. I to select Camilla's house, I actually drove up and down the California coast until I found a house I liked that I thought she could live in. And I made a picture of it and I posted it on on my storyboard wall. So I always had it there. So I always do a biography outline of my character. So, and then when I write my books, I just outline, I outline it and then I just kind of toss it in the order that it needs to be done. And I usually give like writing Howard Keel's life story, I started with Dallas, how he interviewed for the Dallas TV series, and how did he get here. And then it started off with him being born in Gillespie, Illinois. And I brought the story back at the end to Dallas at the end. So I just sat there and we just jumbled his life in little pieces and parts, how he met the King and Queen of England and how he got the part in Annie Get Your Gun. And
Oh, I love that.
do you know who wrote Annie Get Your Gun, by the way? The movie? Sidney Sheldon.
Oh, really?
Amazing. I
Yeah.
had no idea.
Yeah,
No,
interesting.
wonderful.
Yeah,
So-
Sidney's a very dear friend. We used to live a couple of miles away, and he was a very good friend of Howard since the late 40s. And he gave us a great blurb for the book, so be looking for the blurb.
Oh, cool.
Big authors don't give blurbs, so I was very delighted that he would share that with me. We were blessed.
When I wrote this, it went through so many revisions of organization because you could have done this several different ways. It was almost, there was so much independence, and I had to make sure it all made sense. So I lined it all up one way, and then I didn't like it, and redid it, and redid it. It was a challenge that you don't think about until you start doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most wonderful tool that I've discovered in organizing anything as far as before writing a novel is Deb Dixon's GMC, Goal, Motivation, and Conflict. And it's just the most awesome tool. Once you read her book, you won't read anything the same without thinking of those three pieces and ingredients of a book. So probably the first thing I do is I will make an outline based on those ingredients, and I'll do one for each character. What does that character want? What is the obstacle against them to obtaining what they want? Why is it important to them? I think that's probably the first thing I'll do. And I do character sketches, so I have an idea in my mind of what they look like, how they talk, any particular little habit that they have that makes them human, what's important to them, even maybe especially the villains and villainesses. They need to be
Bigger
real.
than life.
Exactly, because especially if you've got a hero or heroine who's a really big person, they need to have an antagonist who is also a really big person, not totally completely evil and not totally completely good, because that makes them real. So you kind of like to know that whoever picks up your book and reads your story is going to be able to understand everyone in the book. And even though your bad guy is a bad guy, and he's going to get his, upcomings, you want your readers to understand what motivated that person to do what they did in your book. So, and I usually do my planning at the synopsis stage, the horrible, dreadful synopsis, terrible, yucky synopsis.
Hate them.
Did I mention how yucky? Yes. It takes a lot of practice, perseverance, professionalism, and a lot of chocolate. If you don't have chocolate, I'm sorry, you can't do a synopsis. You have to have it. Keep it in large quantities close to you, because it's the hardest thing. I learned the hard way that it's good to do a synopsis maybe before you start the book. It's much easier to write the book if you do the synopsis first. I did the book and then I did the hard part afterwards. And don't do that. It's terrible. But that's usually what I'll do. I'll look at the goal, motivation, and conflict of each character involved in the story, and and write a synopsis, make lots and lots of notes, and then let myself go and write the book.
Are any of your fictional characters based on real people?
Mm-hmm.
You-
Yeah.
You mentioned that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Camilla Walker is me, and Johnny Blake in my book is my cousin John Blackburn, who is a gay private eye in San Francisco. And he fell off his porch and broke his arm. So in the second book, I decided to shoot him in the first chapter. And he was very upset that he was going to be written out of the series. But we had such funny conversations about his immobilism when he hurt his arm, about zipping his pants up and, you know, driving a car and all those important things. And I thought it was just wonderful humor, so I just shot him in the first chapter of the second book. And I just lived vicariously through all his phone calls and emails about all the things that were going on in his life. So, and he's still in my books. But it was really interesting because when you select a person's name, and that was one of my problems, her name, I always wanted to call her Camilla Walker, and I called her Cammie. And I couldn't write the book. I just was really stuck. And I had lunch with Ray Bradbury one day in Beverly Hills. His daughter, you know, he never drove a car, so his daughter dropped him off at the restaurant, and I was going to drive him back home. And we were sitting there, and he said, "You're blue today. What's the matter?" And I said, "I can't get the book going. He says, "Well, what's her name?" And I said, "Camilla Walker," and I call her Cammie. And he went, "Oh, she hates that name." I said, "She does?" And he said, "It sounds like clammy. Call her Mel." Went home that afternoon, find and replace. Every place I had put Cammie, I put Mel. I finished the book in 2 weeks. You have to blow life in your character for them to tell you how they want to take that journey. Really important lesson.
Well, there is one. I have an opus. I mean, it's probably the book that I will always love the most, and I'm going to write it one of these days. And it's based on a knight who lived in the 16th century in Germany, whose life is not very well known here in America, but since I'm a history student, I found out about this guy, and yeah, that's probably the only one. The hero in one of my books that I hope I will write before I'm finished is based on the life of that particular knight. Because, you know, everybody has to have their knight in shining armor. And so I have one. I have a huge poster of a monument of him that I dearly love on my wall, and it's a wonderful story. His life, that is a wonderful story.
And you wrote wonderful stories about wonderful people in our life, huh?
Yes,
Our heroes.
definitely.
Our heroes. Basically, everybody that sent me something, I wanted to include.
Mhm.
And the things that I did not put in the book were either because operational security issues. I mean, I heard some great stories that I can't tell you about.
All right, you'd
Just-
have to kill me. I understand that.
I mean,
It's okay, I'll pass.
It's okay.
I mean, just, you know,
I have a
and then
hard
I
time.
talked to another guy who was a lawyer for someone that was, you know, there's a criminal case involved, and I couldn't put that in there. But I just wanted to put everybody's story in there.
Mm-hmm.
One person had the worst story. I mean, he was this big war hero, and he'd written this diary, and it was so boring. I couldn't do anything with it, and I just said, "No, you're out. Just not in the book."
Thank you for keeping our country safe, but I'm not going to write about it, huh? Interesting, because I wondered how many, based on the input you had, why you selected those. That was nice.
And when I thought I was done, I was still getting emails from people, and I wish I mean, it's open, you know. I had to put a stop to it somehow.
No, it's your sequel,
Yeah,
or your
good.
prequel.
Yeah.
Right, the new edition.
Yeah.
This guy keeps sending me. I think he's a spy for the CIA.
You want me to check him out for you?
No, I mean, I'm not going to say his name, but
In my true crime, it's not really the true crime, it's the biography of how not to raise a serial killer. And I have a very high sense of right or wrong, and it's one of the reasons I retired from the investigation business, because really there is no justice in my part of the world, the world that I worked in. And I really burned out, and I had such a high sense of right or wrong. And when Glenn was arrested and admitted to killing 70 women, I wanted to bring closure to all those cases, and they've only wrapped up 2. So I've kept in contact with him, even though he's on death row, because before he gets Old Sparky, which will probably be next fall or the following spring, because his appeal process is over, I want him to give up those names, because I want to put closure to those victims out there who are missing somewhere in America and their family doesn't know where they are, and he's the only one who knows. So that was an influence for me, just left over from, that's the reason I took the case, because I said I don't want to write a true crime. And I knew his brother, and his brother and I were very active in volunteerism in my community. And I just decided when I heard the story that I had to write it. I was the perfect biographer for that man. Several people have said that my work is like Sue Grafton. I did help her with a couple of books, and she did acknowledge me in J is for Judgment. But my character is an investigator, not and a real life person, and that's the difference, in that I was a real person, and these were my real cases. Whereas most mystery writers, Patricia Cornwell, you know, that group of genre and the mystery writers, those are made up characters, and so sometimes when I read their books, it scares me, because, for example, one time I read a book and it said the recoil from the .22 knocked me off my feet.
You're like, yeah, really?
It's not going to knock you off your feet. So, you know, so when I see those little mistakes where they haven't really shot or held a gun or any kind of weapon or even made a phone call to the police department, those things bother me. You know, when I see that they haven't checked their facts and stuff, that really, I go, ooh. So that I'm really a stickler for getting my salient points correct.
That's a good point. I've heard it said that you should write about something you know about. And you shouldn't be writing crime-solving mysteries if you haven't been involved in them.
I'll tell you a story that happened to me at Santa Barbara Writers Conference. When I was writing The Cop Was White as Snow, it's a 8-day conference, and it runs 24 hours a day, and after dinner at night they have what they call the pirate workshop, where you go in and read your work that you've done during the day, and they criticize it, and it's a take no prisoners program. And I was in there one night with this guy with a guitar and a flannel shirt and jeans, and he and I were the only 2 reading, and I'd read and they'd go, "Oh, we just love that book, Joyce. This is my first book. We just love it. We know you're going to find an agent. We know you're going to sell it." The guy would get up there and he'd start reading his book, and they'd go, "Bob, sit down. What is that book about?" This went on for 8 days, 8 nights. Bob and I competed against each other. At the end of the 8 days, he sold the book and got a $10,000 advance. Today, one of his books sells every 7 minutes on Earth. His name was Robert James Waller, and the book was The Bridges of Madison County.
Oh.
Amazing.
And he wrote it. He was in the next cabin over from me during this conference in Santa Barbara.
Amazing. It's incredible.
So when they say your work is no good, it's not necessarily no good, and when they think it's great, it's not necessarily great, is my point.
Well, and I think it's important to remember that every single reader of your book brings a magic ingredient to it that you don't put in it. It's the individual way that each person embraces the story and makes it their own. It's a beautiful thing, because you think you've written the book a certain way that you've done all you can to make it very clear how your reader will respond through the eyes of the heroine or the hero, but that reader will bring something you never expected to that book. So every single book is actually an individual experience for every single reader. And if you touch one life with a book, then what else do you need to do? I mean, sure, we want to see the book sell all over everywhere. We do our best to do that, but no, if one person reads my book and remembers it 10, 15 years from now, I will be a happy writer.